Hare, 2 times. Janavalabha Jaya Girivara Hare Yashodanandana Jaya Brajajanaranjana Jaya Jashodanandana Jaya Brajajanaranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. जयों विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य स्तोत्र सत्य श्री श्रीमद् अभय चरणारविंद भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय, श्री वेद शास्त्र की जय, भागवत महापुराण की जय, निताई गौर परमानंदे हरि ओम. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam 4:24. Text number 17. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya
Nayanam Namaskritya.
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam.
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam.
Tato Jayamudirayet
Jayam Mudirayet.
Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu
Saprayeshu Bhadreshu.
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Yam Bhagavata Sevaya.
Bhagavati Uttama Shloke
Bhagavati Uttama Shloke.
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki.
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtike.
So we'll recite text number 24, text number 17. Sangama kalu viprarshe
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Shiveneha sharirinam
Jiveneha sharirina.
Dullavo munayo dhadyor
Dullabho munayo datyur.
Asangadyam abhipshitam
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Sangama kalu viprarshe
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Shiveneha sharirinam
Jiveneha sharirina.
Dullavo munayo dhadyor
Dullabho munayo datyur.
Asangadyam abhipsitam
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Sangama kalu viprarshe
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Shivaneha sharirinam
Jiveneha sharirina.
Dullavo munayo dhadyor
Dullabho munayo datyur.
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Asangadyam abhipsitam. Sangama kalu viprarshe. Shiveneha sharirinam.
Dullavo munayo
Datyur. Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Shiveneha sharirinam.
Shiveneha sharirina.
Dullabho munayo dadyur.
Dullabho munayo
dhadyor
Sangadyam abhipshitam.
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Shiveneha sharirina.
Shiveneha sharirinam.
Linam
Dullabho munayo datyur.
Dullavo munayo dhadyor
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Asangadyam
abhipsitam.
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Sangama kalu
Viprashe
Shiveneha sharirinam.
Shivaneha sharirinam
Dullabho munayo datyur.
Dullavo munayo dhadyor
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Sangama
kalu viprashe
Shiveneha sharirinam.
Shiveneha
sharirinam
Dullabho munayo datyur.
Dullabho
munayo dhadyor
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Asangadyam
vipsitam
Sangama kalu viprarshe.
Sangama kalu viprashe
Shiveneha sharirinam.
Shiveneha
sharirinam
Dullabho munayo datyur.
Dullabho
munayo dhadyor
Asangadyam abhipsitam.
Asangadyam vipsitam Sangamaha.
Sangama.
So everybody speaks English here, right? Yeah? Okay. In Zurich, you ever do like a German, Swiss German translation? No.
German.
German, yeah? But do you speak English, Prabhu? Yeah?
You understand English? You can speak Portuguese also.
Português, eu falo português também.
You speak Portuguese?
Yeah. You want anybody want Ruski? Говорите русский, okay? Чуть-чуть? Okay. Sangama, association. Khalu, certainly. Viprarishe, oh best of the Brahmanas. Shivena, along with Lord Shiva. Iha, in this world. Sharirinam, those who are engaged in material bodies. Dullava, very rare. Munaya, great sages. Dadyuhu, engaged themselves in meditation. Asangat, being detached from anything else. Yam, unto whom? Abhipsitam, desiring. Translation. The great sage Vidura continued, O best of the Brahmanas, it is very difficult for living entities encaged within this material body to have personal contact with Lord Shiva. Even great sages who have no material attachments do not contact him, despite their always being absorbed in meditation to attain his personal contact. Purport. Since Lord Shiva does not incarnate himself unless there is some special reason, it is very difficult for an ordinary person to contact him. However, Lord Shiva does descend on a special occasion when it is ordered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this regard, it is stated in the Padma Purana that Lord Shiva appeared as a Brahmana in the age of Kali to preach the Mayavada philosophy, which is nothing but a type of Buddhist philosophy. It is stated in the Padma Purana, Mayavada Masach Shastram Prachannam Bhodya Muchyate Mayeva Vihitam Devi Kalo Brahmana Murtina. Lord Shiva, speaking to Parvati Devi, foretold that he would spread the Mayavada philosophy in the guise of a sannyasi Brahmana, just to eradicate Buddhist philosophy. This sannyasi was Sripad Shankaracharya. In order to overcome the effects of Buddhist philosophy and spread Vedanta philosophy, Sripad Shankaracharya had to make some compromise with the Buddhist philosophy, and as such he preached the philosophy of monism, for it was required at that time. Otherwise, there was no need for his preaching Mayavada philosophy. At the present moment, there is no need for Mayavad philosophy or Buddhist philosophy, and Lord Chaitanya rejected both of them. This Krishna consciousness movement is spreading the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya and rejecting the philosophy of both classes of Mayavadi. Strictly speaking, both Buddhist philosophy and Shankara's philosophy are but different types of Mayavad dealing on the platform of material existence. Neither of these philosophies has spiritual significance. There is spiritual significance only after one accepts the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, which culminates in surrendering unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Generally, people worship Lord Shiva for some material benefit, and although they cannot see him personally, they derive great material profit by worshipping him. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Budale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyata Deshadarine. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sedvaita Garadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. So we are continuing on from this topic, learning from the previous chapter about Prithu Maharaj and his taking of renunciation of his kingly duties and going to the forest to meditate, to practice yoga. And we hear of his wife and how she also followed him despite the difficulty that it is to be in the forest. And when he left his body by yogic practice and he passed on to the spiritual world, then she did the final rites and she also did the sati. She entered into the fire and joined him. And then we hear about the different generations which are coming in this chapter, the different sons. And we've come all the way now until the Prachetas. So they were guided that now you must marry, and before marrying they wanted to become more and more advanced in spiritual life. So they went to take renunciation and they went towards the forest side. And then on the way, they encountered Lord Shiva. So interesting thing, because I hadn't read this canto for a long time. So I was studying the previous, the past times leading up to here. And because recently I had to do the service of teaching the Yoga Sutras. Has anyone heard of Yoga Sutras? If you're a yoga teacher, you know. So I was in the US in Miami, so there is one yoga studio which is it's basically the biggest yoga studio there. And the owner of the studio, the owner and her husband, they love devotees. Although they are not devotees officially, but they like Krishna consciousness. So they generally invite devotees from Alachua to do kirtan programs. Sometimes they invite some speakers. But at the same time, it's a very big yoga studio. A lot of people come, so they keep it sensitively. They present things. So very often, Kish from Mayapur is Krishna Kishore. So generally once a month he does a program there. So she wanted me to teach the Yoga Sutras for her class. But obviously in ISKCON we don't really study that. In Gaudiya Vaishnavism we don't really study Yoga Sutras. So in order to teach it, I had to study it. So she says, can you teach it? I said, yeah, no problem, I can teach it. Hopefully now she's not listening on this live. I don't think so it's okay.
It's going on YouTube.
Yeah, so, Anyway, she doesn't know ISKCON Zurich, so it's okay. So I just said, yeah, I know it. So I had to study this text. But luckily there is one devotee called Advaita Prabhu. He was, so he's a devotee, Vaishnava, and also he's qualified. I think he studied at Harvard or he taught at Harvard, one of the two. So his Western name is Edwin Bryant. So he actually compiled a very, very authorized translation of the Yoga Sutras. So after studying that, it's a bit changed the way I study Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam or any text, because now when I study it, I see it from the Ashtanga Yoga point of view as well. Whereas before, when I read this, when I was a few years ago, when I read this canto, then I just didn't, like the story of Prithu Maharaj, I didn't realize actually how prominent actually Ashtanga Yoga is, even in the Bhagavatam, even in the Gita. Generally we just read over it, but actually it's an important thing. Because actually in Satya Yuga, that was the Yuga Dharma. So therefore, Prithu Maharaj being at that time, he was practicing Ashtanga Yoga, which is the proper name is Dhyana Yoga actually, and there has 8 steps, so therefore it becomes called Ashtanga Yoga, but the official name is Dhyana Yoga. Then later some people they say Raja Yoga. Hatha Yoga is not the full Dhyana Yoga, it's a subset of Dhyana Yoga process, which they use nowadays, that word Hatha Yoga. So official name is Dhyana Yoga. Why? Because, what does that verse start? Dhyayatom Vishnum, how did it start? Krita Yog Dhyayatom Vishnum, Traitayam Yajatom Akai, Dwaparer Paricharyayam, Kalota Dhari Kirtana. That in the first Yuga, Krita Yuga, Satya Yuga, the Yuga Dharma is Dhyanam. So it's a meditation on the Lord. So when I was reading what Prithu Maharaj was doing, it's very similar to exactly what you read in Yoga Sutras. That it's mentioning, he's doing different postures. One of the posture, you have to put pressure on the genital point here with your foot, and you have to sit in a certain way, and that creates withdrawal of the senses. So it's described there how he was withdrawing the senses. It's described there how he's doing the pranayama process. And it's described also there's different stages of samadhi. Actually, when I was teaching it, it was it's a very complicated text actually, the Yoga Sutras. Actually, Bhagavad Gita is much simpler, because Krishna explains everything very naturally. Whereas Dhyana Yoga, especially as it's presented in Yoga Sutras, is extremely technical. So there are different stages of samadhi, and there are very small minor differences in those stages of samadhi. So the samadhi process, it becomes so subtle, so fine, that even the way you are meditating on the Lord, it's a very technical. Just like when you have, the example is given there, that when you have a cow, when you meditate on a cow, you're also thinking about the name of the cow, right? You're also thinking of the form of the cow, and all of your memories relating to a cow. So when you're actually meditating on a cow, you're actually meditating, but it's also contaminated by certain vrittis, and it's also contaminated by certain jnana. So it's going very in depth, that how even you detach from all of that, so you simply meditate on the Lord as the Lord is, without imposing anything. And it goes into a lot of depth. So the same thing is described, how Prithu Maharaj was doing this process. So it's a very, very difficult process, the Dhyana Yoga process. Actually in Kali Yuga we can't even understand how it works, let alone to practice it. So in those days, it's explained that in the first Yuga, the age is 100,000 years long. So you live for a very long time. And then in the next yuga, then you live for 10,000 years. And then in the third yuga, you're living for 1,000 years, up to 1,000 years. And then in Kali Yuga, maximum 100 years. So we can even see, I was also teaching them other courses. So one of the course, I was linking it with Christianity, because in the US, especially in Miami, a lot of people are Catholic. So I was researching, even in the Bible, most of the prophets and the ancient people, especially in the Old Testament, they lived more than 100 years, most of them. Like 100 years, 150 years, some 200 years, like that. So same thing we can see in Vedic culture, that there is this understanding how the humans, they used to live much longer. Whereas in Kali Yuga, due to contamination and due to the influence of the age, then the life has become shortened. So therefore, not only the Dhyana Yoga process is very difficult, but it requires a lot of time. So Prithu Maharaj, he was very qualified, not only as a king, but also as a devotee. So therefore, he was successful in this execution of this process. And his wife Archi, she also had that purity. So therefore, Prabhupada explains there that she actually was such a chaste wife, even she was willing to sacrifice her life, that the husband has gone. So that's called sati process. So she also entered the fire. Now in India that's considered illegal, because people, they were doing by force. They were socially pressuring, or also by force the women have to enter. But actually Prabhupada explains, in that time nobody was forcing them, but just they had so much love and so much devotion, they thought that this person I'm married to for not only one life. When you're married, actually in Vedic system, is for many lifetimes. I think the number is 7. Does anyone know? 7 lifetimes, right? So they have so much attachment, so much love and devotion, that the wife, she actually wants to enter the fire to go with him directly. She doesn't want to wait any longer. Nowadays, obviously in the modern age, we have this artificial equality. So actually Vedic system is equality, but equality is based on the soul platform, because the body anyway is not equal. Whereas nowadays in the modern society, we like to say that husband is equal, wife is equal, but the Vedic system is that just like nowadays, if you tell this story about sati, people, they'll be very angry. What? The woman, she has to sacrifice her life for the husband? It sounds like a very patriarchal society. But actually that's a healthy part of society, that you have hierarchy. It's not that the husband is the supreme, but it's that we have a hierarchy. So the husband, he has his gurus, he has his seniors, the parents, and the parents have their seniors, and ultimately on the top of the hierarchy is God, Vishnu. So therefore in the Greek, when you have hierarchy, here arkos, it means the holy order. So hierarchy is actually something which is given by God. And therefore in the family system, the wife, she has a submissive role to the husband. It's not that she's inferior in her ontological position, because today I'm husband, tomorrow I'm a wife. So actually in this life we are one body, next life we may be another body. So it's not that anybody who understands reincarnation thinks I'm superior, because today I'm one role, tomorrow I'm in another role. But for the work of doing this particular body I have, the particular varna and ashram, then the wife, she takes the submissive role. And actually because of that, it sets the example for the children as well. Because the children, the principle of authority and the principle of parampara has to be learned from the parents. Because these principles, they are very subtle and they pervade all relationships in this world. So therefore the child, they have to observe this in the parents, that the parents, the child is observing how the man and the woman are behaving towards each other. From the father, the child will learn how a man should behave towards a wife, towards a woman. And from the mother, they will learn also the principle of parampara. That the father, he's learning from his parents and he's learning from his gurus. And then the wife, she's following the husband. So therefore they have faith in the principle of authority. Because otherwise when there is not principle of authority, then the child will not be able to accept guru, child will not be able to accept the teacher in the school, will not be able to have proper relationships. So therefore that's why in the modern age with the artificial equality, the children are messed up. Just like when I was at school, one of the boys, he tried to set fire to the school. And he had to go to the juvenile correction center. Why? Because there is no faith in principle of authority. So obviously in the modern schools, there is some reason also not to have faith in them, because they are not giving us the ultimate education. But the principle is there of authority. So therefore this system is designed in such a way that everyone becomes healthy in their relationships. So you can see that when you're in such a high level of purity, high level of chastity, then even such an extreme thing as doing the sati process, it happens. So you can see this is a very exemplary thing. It's not that Prabhupada saying everybody in ISKCON should follow this, but we should follow the mood of this, we should follow the principle of this. In this age there are many things which we cannot do. Just like Prabhupada says about polygamy, that in this age we should not do it because it will be misunderstood and it's not, practical in this age because the man is not very qualified. But when you study Bhagavatam, then you see there are different saints, they have more than one wife, especially in the Kshatriya Varna. So therefore, it's possible. But in this age, according to time, place and circumstance, it may not be appropriate. So then we see that Prithu, he had, let me just go back here. He had his children, and one of them was, where is this? Is Vichitashva, or his name was given Antardana, because although Indra made an activity which was not very pleasant to disturb the whole sacrifice, still the son was not angry, he was calm, so therefore he gave that name. And then he had a son, and he had his brothers, so he was the oldest of the brothers, and he, I think, had 3 more brothers. So he gave them different parts of the world to rule over. So we can see this is a common theme, not only him but also Yudhishthira, and we see also in the Ramayana the same thing, that the world generally is divided amongst the saintly kings. So Vedic culture is not just in India, but it was spread around the world. And therefore we can see it, even now modern academics, they understand, they call that Indo-European culture, because we understand that language is the most effective medium by which culture spread, by communication. So therefore we can see that all of these Indo-European languages, they're all connected, whether it's Germanic, like we have primarily in Switzerland, right? Germanic language. Although you have Italian also here, right? And something else, French, something. So you have also Latin language. So we can see in European languages there is this connection. And recently I was also reading that some people also theorize that the Anatolian language, so like Turkey, ancient Turkish, and Assyrian is the precursor to Middle Eastern religions, like Assyrian and other cultures. There's one more I was reading. So these languages, they're also linked to Sanskrit, because Sanskrit is the oldest of this Indo-European language family. So why do we see these languages are linked? Because Vedic culture, it started in Bharata, but it spread around the world. And also when Parashuram was there in another time, then when he kicked out the Kshatriyas, then they also had to spread to other parts of the world. And they were not given the Vedas, because to study Veda you have to become qualified. That's why in this text it says Vipra. So they didn't have the Vedas, but they had some remnants of that knowledge. So that's why you find these remnants all around the world. So Antardana, he had his 3 sons in different parts of the world. And then his son was called Barhishat, or Prachina Barhi. And then the children of Prachina Barhi, they're called the Prachetas. So that's called a patronymic. Patronymic means the name which is derived from the father's name. So the Prachetas, they decided to go on this spiritual adventure, and on the way they met Lord Shiva. So that's where we arrive today. So in this text, it's Vidura is asking Maitreya. So yesterday we heard that how did they meet him on the way and what happened. So then Vidura now is continuing that breast of the Brahmanas, is it very difficult for living entities encaged within this material body to have personal contact with Lord Shiva? Because Lord Shiva is not very easy to get his darshan. It's not very easy to get the contact with Lord Shiva. He's generally meditating. That's one of his... He's actually the perfect meditator. Therefore, one of the names for Shiva is Adi Yogi. He's the first yogi. Because Lord Shiva, he's always meditating on the Lord. Therefore, he's known as Vaishnavanam Yatha Shambhu. He's the topmost of all devotees. And not only that, but he's very renounced. He's simply engaged in meditation. That's the thing which fulfills him the most. So therefore, the way he appears also is very simple. With his dreadlocks, he covers himself in the ash. He wears a simple cloth. So therefore, Lord Shiva, he's not so much into engaging in the world. He's very much how can you say, he's very advanced so much that he's not even likes to relate too much with this world. So if you want to get the association or the darshan of Lord Shiva, you have to become very qualified. So therefore Vidura is asking that it must be very difficult for living entities who have material body to get personal contact with Lord Shiva. And he's saying here, specifically the word Prabhupada used is living entities encaged within this material body. So that's very interesting, because generally we say other words, but here Prabhupada uses the word encaged, just like the material body is like a prison. It's like a cage, like the cage in the prison. So actually this is the word used, sharira. So that's one of the meaning of sharira, that is the material body. So we see that word is used. Another time we see the word used is bhuta. Just like in the Gita, if you notice, Krishna generally refers more to us as bhuta than as jiva. So why is the word bhuta used? Sometimes we say bhuta means ghost, but that's one of the meanings. But because the ghosts, they have predominantly subtle body, they don't have gross body. That's why we sometimes say bhuta. But actually bhuta also refers to us. Bhuta actually refers to any living being in the material world. And the reason is that the root bhu, it means something which comes into being. So the jiva, he's eternal, right? He never comes into being and he never goes out of being. We learned that in Bhagavad Gita. But why is the word bhuta used? Because bhuta means the embodied soul. So therefore this is actually our position in the material world. We are not simply the soul, but we are the embodied soul. Because the soul, when his independence is compromised by the material energy, he should no longer think that I am a free soul, I can do whatever I want, because we are not free. Therefore Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that this material energy is impossible to overcome. Unless it's by the mercy of the Lord, you cannot overcome the material energy. So therefore we must understand that yes, we are the soul, but we are embodied soul. And therefore, because we are embodied soul, that's why we have Varnashram Dharma. There are different spiritual frameworks for activity. One is the Bhagavata Dharma, which is directly dealing with the soul. So in Bhagavata Dharma, the role of man and woman is equal. The Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, all of these things, the man and woman, they do equally. But in the Varnashram, there is a different roles, not only for male and female, but also there is a roles for different Varnas and different ages which you're in. So this is designed, why? Because when you're embodied, you need some special process to help you overcome the bodily identification. And when you overcome bodily identification, then you can really practice purely Bhagavata Dharma. So therefore in this age, Prabhupada says that the devotee, he must practice both the Bhagavata Dharma and the Pancharatrik Vidhi. He explained that just like you have a train, so the train runs on 2 tracks. So the Pancharatrik Vidhi means the selected parts of Varnashram Dharma and Vedic Dharma. Varnashram Dharma means Vedic Dharma. So specifically for this age and previous age also, but specifically for this age, we need some adjustment because we cannot follow all of the strict rules and regulations. We cannot follow all the strict rules of cleanliness. That's like in those times, if you wanted pure water, you use one well only for the deity and another well you use for bathing. You cannot use the same water source because it's considered to be contaminated. And in the same way, all of the grains and all of the fruits which you offer to the Lord, they have to be collected in a certain way. It's not that nowadays we go to, what's the supermarket here? Coop, or in England you have Tesco's. In America you have Walmart. So you cannot simply go to Walmart and buy some fruit and vegetable and then offer. In that system, it's very strict. Everything must be very pure. And similarly, the purity of the devotee must be very strict as well. What you touch, who you associate with, even who you see, there is so much strictness in purity. So that system was very, very strict. So therefore, the Pancharatrik system was given. There are different Pancharatrik texts. So the Pancharatrik system was given in order to make it more easy, so there is some adjustment given for the modern age. So therefore that Prabhupada says that actually Bhagavata Dharma is sufficient theoretically, but because we are not so clean and so Brahminical, we require the Pancharatrik system to train us. And that way, when we follow Bhagavata Dharma, we follow it properly. So therefore the Pancharatrik system makes the strict rule, you must wake up at a certain time, you must follow this process, etc., etc. That way it becomes appropriate. So obviously, in this age, we cannot follow this dhyana process which Prithu Maharaj was following. And similarly, the Prachetas, they are also going to follow this kind of system. But we cannot do it. But we can follow the system which is given in our age, which is Harinam Sankirtan Yagya. And Prabhupada gave also deity worship process via the Pancharatric system. So Lord Shiva, He's come to give them His mercy. So we later in the next verses we are going to hear what Lord Shiva's teachings to them are. It's a lot of teachings and He's giving the glories of the Lord. So it becomes very in depth, we're going to hear. So it said, even great sages who have no material attachments, they do not get the chance to contact Him. So it's not that anybody gets this opportunity. Narada Muni, he's more accessible generally. He generally appears to many different kinds of people. To many fallen people we hear even how Narada Muni, he's approaching Megrari the hunter, and he's approaching so many other people in the Bhagavatam. But Lord Shiva, his appearance is not as easy to get. So therefore Vidura, he's wondering that how is it possible that they got this opportunity. So we will hear that later on. And it's explained in this verse that Dulabo Munaya Dadyur, that it's very rare that they get this association. And what are they going to do? Dadyur. So the Dadyur is from the same root as Dhyanam, meditation, Dhyana Yoga. So despite being very expert in Dhyana Yoga, still many people, they do not get this opportunity to get Lord Shiva. And Prabhupada is explaining here in the purport that Lord Shiva rarely incarnates, but in Kali Yuga there is one special incarnation which Lord Shiva comes. Does anyone remember what it was? Prabhupada says in the purport, Shankaracharya. So Shankaracharya is a very unique incarnation because it seems like, what's the word? Counterproductive. Apparently it seems counterproductive that Lord Shiva is coming, but actually he's teaching the wrong thing, it seems. So does anyone remember what Prabhupada says in the purport? Actually why it's not counterproductive? Because what does he come to do? Yeah, to establish the Vedas again. Because Buddhism came, how long was Buddhism? Around 3,000, 3,500 years ago? Something like that? 500 before Christ. So about, I think it's 3,000, something like that. So anyway, he came a long time ago. And he basically was teaching. There is actually, it's a very interesting thing. If you like to read about it, Prabhupada's Sannyas Guru, Bhakti Pragya Keshav Maharaj, he wrote one book about this, about Buddhism, because the Buddha which is described in the Bhagavatam is not the general Buddha which we hear for Buddhism. But anyway, Buddha, according to Bhagavatam, he came, why? To teach Ahimsa Paramo Dharma. But we can see that both of those two Buddhas, they had the same kind of connection, what they were teaching. So first he was teaching that basically in Kali Yuga, there is a ban on these animal sacrifices. In previous ages it was possible. But in the Kali Yuga, the sacrifice of animal is restricted. But at the same time, the Brahmanas at that time, they were misusing the Vedas in order to exploit animals and to cause lots of disturbance. You still find this in Nepal. I think 4 years ago, it was a certain astrological time and they killed hundreds of thousands of animals. They did some huge sacrifice. And therefore some people have said, they theorize that that's why there was an earthquake, because they did such a heavy sinful activity that they got a heavy reaction. So it's explained in Kali Yuga, there is 5 things which are banned. Ashwamedham, so the Ashwamedha Yagya, which is the same thing which Prithu Maharaj was doing. Ashwamedham Gavalambhyam. Gavalambhyam means also with the cow, there is a sacrifice where you offer the old cow into the fire, and from that comes a new cow, a young cow. So it's explained, Lord Chaitanya, he was debating this actually. So he was explaining, Lord Chaitanya, that the cow is killed, yes, but they give a new cow which comes out. So actually the Brahmanas, they are just testing their power. It's not that they want to sacrifice the cow and eat the cow or something like that. Because in Islam they say, we have sacrifice, you have sacrifice. But the sacrifice is not comparable actually. Ashwamedham Gavalambhyam Sannyasam. So the karma sannyas, which the same thing which Shankaracharya was teaching, the karma sannyas, that's also banned. We are following the Bhagavad Vidhi sannyas, which is more the sannyas of consciousness than the external sannyas. So therefore Prabhupada, he was in charge of so much money, he was in charge of so much properties. Prabhupada used to take opulent prasadam because he was not doing the karma kanda sannyas, he was following the Bhagavad sannyas, which is the sannyas of consciousness. Not externally we have to be renounced also in our Gaudiya Vaishnava sannyas, but we can use things. That's the principle of yukta vairagya. Sannyasam and then pala paitrika means that if you have I can't remember now. You have either your wife cannot have a child or your brother-in-law cannot have a child, but I think if you cannot have a child, your brother-in-law can impregnate the wife, or is it the other way around? I can't remember. Anyway, one of them. So basically, say you're impotent and you cannot have a child, then your brother, he can give his sperm to have the child, because it's the same bloodline from the same parents. So therefore, that's also one of the things which is banned in Kali Yuga. And that's the last one. And then Pala Paitrika means offering of the certain offerings for the forefathers is banned. And then the last one is Devarena Sutopatim. That's the one where if you're impotent, then the brother, he can become the father on behalf of you. So these 5 things, they are banned in the Kali Yuga. So Lord Shiva, he came. Lord Shiva, he came as Shankaracharya. One reason why, because Buddha, in order to do all of this job he had to reject the authority of the Vedas. Because if you're misrepresenting the Vedas, because ultimately it's not so much about the external, it's about the philosophy. So Buddha, he was saying, okay, in order to get rid of this horrible thing which they're doing, it's better that they don't follow the Vedas. At least they will be free from these horrible sinful things which they're doing. But at the same time, when you do not have the right authority, which is the Vedas, then again you can become lost. So therefore Shankaracharya, he came to teach something very similar to Buddhism, but based on the Vedas. And why did he not teach Buddhism based on the Vedas? Because Buddhism is teaching, at least modern Buddhism is teaching, that ontologically there is nothing known as spiritual. There is just material, and when you get nirvana, you escape this material cycle of birth and death, and then you become nothing. So of course, according to Vedas, that cannot be proven, especially Vedanta, it cannot be proven. So therefore Shankaracharya, he had to teach something similar to Buddhism, that it's not a big jump for the people, but at the same time it's based on the Vedas. So therefore he taught that yes, all of this material variety is very bad, material relationships cause so much suffering, etc. Buddha was teaching the 4 noble truths. So the ultimate thing is that variety, that's why it's called nirvana. One meaning of the vana is that the variety of this world. So therefore he was teaching that yes, ultimately there is no variety, but it's a oneness of spiritual existence. So it's just sat existence, there is no variety within that. So that also is obviously not the correct philosophy, because we understand that ultimately everything comes from God. Janmadhyasya yataha. So therefore that's not an intelligent philosophy to have also. Why? Because intelligence means to understand causal relationships. What's the word for that in Sanskrit? The Satkaryavad, I think? Satkaryavad, right? That everything ultimately comes from Sat. So if there is personalism here, that personal quality must also be there in the Supreme. So the causal relationship is that anything which exists in the cause, in everything which exists in the effect comes from the cause. So therefore we had our Vaishnavacharyas later on, and they came to defeat this Mayavad philosophy. So ultimately Shiva, he was just trying to make a bridge between Buddhism and the Vedas. So in order to make it not too difficult for the people, he just gave them a slight step further from what they were already believing in. And then later on our Vaishnavacharyas came, and then Prabhupada explains in the end of the purport, he says something interesting here. He says that actually ultimately both Buddhism and Shankara are Mayavad philosophy. So generally we distinguish that Mayavad means that you have some spiritual ontological existence, but obviously the variety and the personal aspect of the divine is Maya. But Prabhupada here is saying actually both of them is Mayavad philosophy, because they are both teaching the wrong understanding of Sat. What is Sat? One is saying that Sat doesn't exist, and one is saying that Sat is impersonal. So ultimately they are both misconstruing what is the actual spiritual reality. Therefore they are both Mayavad philosophy. And therefore Prabhupada explained, Lord Chaitanya reject both of them. And this Krishna consciousness movement is spreading the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya and rejecting the philosophy of both classes of the Mayavadi. So Lord Chaitanya, he's giving what he's giving? Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. That the Supreme, which is very similar to Vishishta Advaita. So I was in Miami actually recently, and we were doing kirtan in one park, and there was one boy from the what do they call, Shivananda line. So you heard of Shivananda, some of you? So Shivananda, he's very famous yoga teacher also, but he's not just teaching asana, he was teaching philosophy, he teaches kirtan, he teaches the Mayavad version of bhakti as well, kind of semi-Mayavadi. He's not so heavy on Mayavad, but it's more impersonal. So I was speaking with one of the boys there, and he was saying, so what is your philosophy? He's saying that because we are understanding Advaita. So I explained to him, yes, we also believe in Advaita, but we believe in the qualification of what Advaita means. So it's very similar to Vishishta Advaita, which the previous acharyas, they gave. But Lord Chaitanya, he further enhanced that understanding by giving Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. That Brahma is one simultaneously and different, and that's inconceivable. So although, that's why in Bhagavatam it's explained that Vadanti Tattva Vidas, Vadanti Tattva Vidam, what is it? Vadanti Tattva Vidas Tattvam Yaj Jnanam Advayam. That this Prabhupada explains this non-dual substance known as Brahman. So Brahman actually is Advaita, but that Advaita has its own inherent variety inside of it. So therefore in English sometimes it's said that you have two words, variety and variegatedness. So variety means that there are many things, and variegatedness means there is one thing, but within that thing there is variety. So therefore Lord Chaitanya explains that Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, that simultaneously there is oneness and difference. And therefore Bhagavatam explains Yajganam Advayam Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan iti Shabdate, that the Brahma is one, but is perceived of in these three forms. That God is impersonal, God is localized, just like here, the Prachetas and Prithu, they're focusing on Paramatma realization, on the Dhyana Yoga, and Bhagavan realization. So these all are one, but at the same time they're different. So Krishna and Brahma is the same thing, but at the same time different. Therefore Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that everything is I am the same as everything, but yet nothing is the same as me. So Krishna, he withholds his independence as an individual personal being, but at the same time everything is part of Krishna. So Lord Chaitanya, he's teaching this, and this is the significance here of this verse, that Lord Shiva in Kali Yuga, he's coming as Shankaracharya, specifically just for the task of dealing with this Buddhism. And we see also when you read Yoga Sutras, because we were discussing earlier about the Ashtanga Yoga, it was very interesting. That book is also is also a response to Buddhism. Actually, this, what we call 6 schools of Vedic philosophy, they're all, because at that time Vedic culture had a monopoly. And then when Buddha came, it was first time that the Vedas, they lost a monopoly in India. Because generally for millions of years, it's always Vedas is the epistemological authority. So when Buddhism came, it shook up all of the Brahminical class and all of the thinkers, all of the munis. So therefore they had to present what are these 6 different philosophies. So therefore Yoga Sutra is also dealing with Buddhism, and it's specifically dealing with the point that the soul is eternal. It doesn't go much into theology, but it's explaining how the soul is eternal. And there are different schools of Buddhism, so it specifically identifies a prominent school at that time, and basically explaining, because in Mayavad philosophy they say that the soul, the independence of the soul is just an illusion, just while you're in the material world, and when you become liberated, then you merge into the one consciousness, something like that. So therefore they're explaining that Buddhism and Mayavad, they say that from moment to moment, because the soul, especially in Buddhism, they explain that there is no soul, because Shankara, he says there is soul, but it will merge again. So it's like there is soul now, but ultimately becomes one. And Buddhism say there is no soul. But if there is no soul, then from moment to moment, what is the thing which is holding the memories? What is the thing which is holding the ahankara? What is the thing which is holding all of these things? So it becomes very hard for the Buddhists to explain. So therefore in that text also it's an attack on this kind of philosophy. So ultimately we can understand that Lord Shiva, and this verse is relevance to us, is that Lord Shiva, he comes at different times for different jobs. And in this age he came to deal with Buddhism in order to bring back the Vedas. And then he was just doing it on behalf of the Lord, but the Lord had a plan. So therefore he sent his other acharyas. And ultimately the Lord came as Lord Chaitanya to teach us Achintya Veda, Veda Tattva. And another point we can learn is that the Prachetas and Prithu Maharaj, they're focusing on Dhyana Yoga because they understand that this is the ultimate goal. Therefore, although you're a big king, you can be the most pious, the most wealthy, everything, but ultimately when the time is right, which is actually always, we must always be ready to surrender to the Lord. So in this age, the surrender to the Lord comes in the form of Harinam Sankirtan Yagya and following the process as given by Srila Prabhupada. So there's 5 minutes. If there's any question, comment, then you can share them now.
Thank you very much for the class, Prabhu. I was wondering, I've always had this question, why did Mahaprabhu appear in following Madhva Acharya, like in Dvaita line? As you say, somehow we're very close to Vishishta Dvaita, no?
Mm-hmm.
In our understanding, that's how I understand. So what do you think? Do you know anything about that? Or is it just because Madhavendra Puri is coming there, but then why is Madhavendra Puri coming in this line?
So actually I was listening to a lecture by Keshava Maharaj. He talks about this in depth in one of the lectures, but I cannot remember everything he said. But basically Lord Chaitanya, there's 4 sampradayas, so he took different principles from each sampradaya, and it's explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita. In Kali Yuga, Lord Chaitanya has come to synthesize all of these sampradayas. Because now there is some Madhva sampradaya, Shri sampradaya is still quite prominent, but what is the other one? You have the Kumara is Nimbarka. So the Nimbarka sampradaya is not as big now. And the Shri Vaishnava sampradaya also is quite big in South India, but the spreading is not going on. So Lord Chaitanya, he specifically came in Kali Yuga to synthesize all of these sampradayas and to spread the movement around the world. So from Madhva, he took this Vishishta Dvaita, he appreciated this, but at the same time he gave some kind of update or some enhancement on this, some further clarification. But which one was dualism? It was Madhva or Ramanuja? Dvaita. And then Ramanuja was Vishishta Dvaita? So so Madhva was dualism, right? So Madhva, he was basically emphasizing dualism. Why? Because Shankara was so heavy on the oneness that he wanted to balance it out. And therefore he shows the two like that. And he was so strict that it said that even if you're in the forest and the tiger is going to chase you, and you see a Shiva temple or demigod temple, you cannot go in there to take shelter. Better let the tiger eat you. Because their philosophy is a response to counterbalance the strong emphasis on oneness. So his philosophy is correct, but it's a specific reaction for Shankaracharya's philosophy. So then later it became further enhanced by other acharyas and ultimately become enhanced until Lord Chaitanya's philosophy. So they are Vaishnava sampradayas, they are authorized, but at the same time Lord Chaitanya clarifies the point more accurately, more precisely. So there is a much more in-depth answer, but I cannot give it. But maybe I can find you that lecture of Keshava Maharaj. But luckily, yes, for this question there is a very in-depth answer. So, but I cannot give it right now. But you can research it there, and I can give you the link also. Maybe Prabhu knows also, Krishna Prabhu.
The Sampradaya of Madhvacharya is very fitting. Madhvacharya was a very powerful Acharya, devotee of Krishna, but the connection with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Madhvacharya is because of Madhavendra Puri, Advaita Acharya, and Nityananda Prabhu was disciple from him. And he shows the symptom of Madhurya Rasa, the deep emotions of connection with Radharani and all these things, because this the Madhavendra Puri and Jayadeva Goswami was the devotees before Lord Chaitanya that shows the symptoms of Astika Bhava and Madhura Rasa, and Madhavendra Puri give this connection with the Sampradaya of Lord Chaitanya.
Thank you, Prabhu. Very nice. So it's also directly because of the initiation as well in that Sampradaya. Yeah, very nice. So luckily, Lord Chaitanya there's so much detail because he was so recent. There's so much detail. So I remember the lecture by Keshav Maharaj. He went very in depth, very interesting. And he went mentioning about the 4 sampradayas. Do you remember, Prabhu? He took one thing from each sampradaya, or 2 things. I don't remember also, but we can find out. I can try to give you the link of that lecture. Any other question, contribution on this topic? Okay, thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. ISKCON Zurich Yatra ki jai.
Sandipani Muni Krishna Prabhu ki jai.
Bro, what is the verse of Yukta Vairagya, Krishna Prema, Prabhu? You remember? Yukta Vairagya Munchate, how does it start? Okay. That is detached from the sense objects, detached from things of this world, seeing them in relationship, how I can do everything for Krishna. So instead of saying that this car is no good, it's inferior, you say, how can I use this car for Krishna? Nirvana, Krishna Samadhi. So you see everything as a complete relationship with Krishna. That's called Vairagya. So this is the principle. Yes, especially in Lord Chaitanya's movement, this is the principle that sannyas means to be renounced of everything, right? But even if you're renounced, you can still have some level of attachment. That's like I can be renounced from my phone and third of but I will still be here crying. So externally I'm detached from this, but internally something there. So sannyas of consciousness means that you can have everything, money, phone, car, but you're using it purely for Krishna consciousness. And Lord Chaitanya, he came to teach that. Lord Chaitanya, sannyasis, they're not allowed to have music because music is sense gratification. But Lord Chaitanya, he was singing and dancing. Sannyasi is not allowed to dance because dance is also material enjoyment, like party. And also sannyasis, they have to become detached from the tongue. So they cannot eat opulent things. They just, like Buddhism, they only eat once a day. So when you're a renounced monk, you're not supposed to eat much. But Lord Chaitanya used to eat very opulent prasadam, like Jagannath. Why? Because the difference is that he is following his sannyas, that I will only eat things which is offered to Krishna. Then you can eat anything, because you are then renounced from material objects. Because if you take prasadam, it is spiritual. Yes, but he's eating prasadam. When Lord Chaitanya is taking prasadam, he's honoring the remnants of God. When we take prasadam, we may be eating to enjoy. So you can offer opulent thing to Krishna, and then you say, okay, I will eat this to honor the remnants of the Lord. So the food which is sacrificed to the Lord. And instead of singing and dancing, that way, by eating you become sannyasi, because whatever you eat, you only eat what is the remnants of Krishna. And if there's nothing prasadam, then you don't eat. That's the devotee. Just like Mahavishnu Swami, with him, he likes to eat a lot of prasadam. But whenever there is no prasadam, he will not eat even one grain from outside. He will not eat bread, he will not take juice from And then Lord Chaitanya, he used to sing, but his singing is singing the